Welcome to this special compilation video which focuses on the Ryman League Premier Division title race during the second half of the 2000-2001 season. The Premier Division table at the halfway stage towards the end of January was shaping up the way many had predicted before the season started in terms of the clubs with the best financial resources and strongest squads challenging for the title. Although second place Gravesend and Northfleet and fifth place Hampton and Richmond Borough were a surprise packet amongst that group and were therefore not expected to last the pace. Realistically then, it was just third place Canvey Island and the pre-season title favourites Aldershot Town who were the only likely challengers to current leaders Farnborough Town. Farnborough though was certainly the team in form at this stage of the season, and by the time they took on Enfield on the 10th of February they'd gone 10 points clear at the top and were on a run of 8 wins in their previous 9 league matches without conceding a goal in their last 4. Enfield's side for this match was severely under strength though, with no less than 10 first-choice players missing and with the majority of their replacements having only had a handful of matches at this sort of level between them. Farnborough on the other hand were fielding more or less a full-strength side with only skipper Steve Watson missing, and apart from recent signing Chris Piper who was making his first appearance in the starting lineup, this was a team packed with experience and proven ability, and because of that it always looked likely that this would be a case of men against boys. Indeed, Enfield were now a shadow of the side that used to challenge regularly for the Ryman League Premier Division title, and a run of only 1 win in their last 8 league matches had seen them slump down to 15th place in the table. It was no surprise then that Farnborough got on top straight away, and after a long spell of pressure they almost took the lead in the 14th minute when Jimmy Dack's long-range shot was deflected onto the crossbar, but Chris Piper's effort from the rebound ended up as an unintentional cross, which Steve Darlington eventually failed to control. Darlington, of course, along with Farnborough defender Darren Annan, were former Enfield players, but both had ended up having to be sold to pay off debts. In fact, that was what happened to Enfield's famous old Southby Road ground as well, which was why they were now homeless and playing at Boreham Wood, a decision which incensed the Enfield supporters so much that around 85% of them subsequently deserted the club. Indeed, the culprit, Chairman Tony Lazaru, annoyed the supporters even more when he sacked popular manager Jim Chandler just after Christmas and replaced him with Tom Loiseau from struggling Division 2 side Cheshunt, presumably because Loiseau was a fellow member of Enfield's huge Greek Cypriot community and therefore wouldn't criticise Lazaru like Chandler had. In fact, Loiseau then went and plundered the North London Cypriot Sunday League in his search for new players, with forward George Gregoriou immediately receiving plenty of stick from the supporters for only having a fraction of the ability of former Enfield heroes such as Steve Darlington, for example. However, Gregoriou almost made them eat their words in the 23rd minute when he fired in a low shot from the edge of the area which saw Farnborough keeper Stuart Mackenzie produce a bit of a fumble, then a collision, shall we say, with Enfield forward Brian Hammett, which could easily have been given as a penalty, but then finally Mackenzie made a reasonable save from Robert Boyce's shot from the loose ball. Somewhat predictably though, Farnborough just upped a gear and promptly took the lead just a minute later, although they needed a big helping hand, or rather a boot initially, from Enfield keeper Jerome John to do so, as his miss-hit clearance went straight to Gary Crawshaw, whose eventual shot should then have been dealt with fairly comfortably, but it squirmed through John's grasp and into the bottom corner. Ironically, John was one of Enfield's few experienced players, having been signed from conference side Kingstonian, but defender Dave Reddington was one of manager Loiseau's new signings from a lower level, and that showed in the 39th minute when he got in a right mess under pressure from Steve Darlington, and that allowed Lenny Piper to nip in and put Farnborough 2-0 up with a good finish. That was how it stayed until half-time, but presumably Farnborough manager Graham Westley wasn't happy with that, as his side came out for the second half even more fired up, and Gary Crawshaw nearly made it 3 just a minute after the break after some more Sunday League defending, but keeper Jerome John redeemed himself this time with a good save. No doubt manager Westley and his assistant Graham Pearce were doubly determined to win this match as they had a brief unsuccessful spell in charge at Enfield just before taking over at Farnborough and therefore had something to prove. However, that wasn't too difficult as money was beginning to talk in terms of which side could afford the better quality players, especially in the 51st minute when Farnborough put together a slick passing move which was only spoilt by Lenny Piper getting himself into an offside position and interfering with play from his brother Chris's shot, even if he hadn't touched the ball past keeper John, who again didn't look very convincing. When he was at Enfield as manager, it was rumoured that Wesley, a successful businessman, wanted to buy the club while their Southbury Road ground was still in existence, but chairman Tony Lazarou turned him down. Of course, it then ended up with Wesley buying Farnborough Town instead and installing himself as chairman whilst putting plenty of money into the club. And when former Leeds and Southampton forward Ian Baird was brought on as a substitute halfway through the second half, it really made the few remaining Enfield supporters realise what they were missing, especially when Tom Loiseau brought on the unknown Erdan Dozdoglu as one of their substitutes. Although Lee Allen, the other Enfield substitute who came on there, had been more or less irregular during the season so far, it didn't make any difference, and in fact Farnborough got even more on top in the last 10 minutes or so, with Lenny Piper forcing a good save out of keeper John in the 82nd minute after being given far too much space in which to run at the Enfield defence. It was now obvious that Enfield were becoming a bit demoralised, as the paltry crowd of just 313 was a far cry from the 1,000 plus they would have got for this sort of fixture back at Southbury Road in the mid-90s. And with the constant drizzle now becoming a lot heavier, it was a very bleak scene indeed for the Enfield supporters, who were either suffering in silence or beginning to drift home. However, things were looking bright for Farnborough as they created yet another chance when Jimmy Dack's free kick pierced through the gloom in the 90th minute for Scott Corbett to unluckily hit the bar with a diving header. However, substitute Ian Baird then wrapped things up just seconds later anyway when he found himself totally unmarked to head in Justin Gregory's cross. In the end then, the predictable 3-0 away win was the final outcome, and it proved that at this level of the non-league game, to challenge for a title you have to have a squad containing at least 11 players who have played in the Ryman League Premier Division or higher, together with a strong enough financial backing that you can go out and buy more players of that calibre when necessary. And unfortunately Enfield had neither, and sadly it looked increasingly like they were on the road to oblivion in the very near future. As for Farnborough though, surely the only way was up, and certainly their enthusiastic travelling supporters thought so. The following Saturday then saw Farnborough take on mid-table Maidenhead United, who had lost their last two matches and hadn't played or trained for 2 weeks due to the torrential rain which had disrupted football at all levels throughout the season so far. Farnborough hadn't suffered as badly as that though, and they were even fortunate enough to have a full-strength side available for this one, with skipper Steve Watson returning to replace Chris Piper in midfield. Maidenhead though had 1 or 2 regulars missing, mainly up front, so manager Alan Devonshire, the former West Ham and England winger, decided to field a 3-5-2 formation and pack the midfield in an effort to stop Farnborough creating chances. Farnborough though had the bonus of what was now a settled 4-4-2 formation, with fullbacks Mickey Warner and Justin Gregory getting forward at every opportunity, as they were protected by 3 very fit and competitive midfield players in Scott Corbett, Steve Watson and Jimmy Dack, whilst Lenny Piper liked to join the attack from a left-sided position in much the same way that Mark Overmars did for Arsenal, but without the pace of course. Although manager Graham Wesley did occasionally change to a 3-5-2 system from time to time, every player now knew what was expected of them and everything was working like clockwork. Indeed, they had a chance to take the lead after just 90 seconds of this match, with Mickey Warner's positive run from the right-back position starting things off, although an offside decision ruined things in the end, as Lenny Piper got too far forward again just as keeper Richard Barnard was deflecting Gary Crawshaw's follow-up shot over the bar from point-blank range. Barnard though made an even better save 7 minutes later, and a legitimate one as well, when he got down to his right to block another Crawshaw effort as Farnborough looked much sharper all round. However, Farnborough failed to build on that impressive start, and they only managed one other worthwhile attempt at goal in the rest of the first half, when a Steve Watson shot bounced narrowly wide in the 25th minute after a good 6-man move. Despite it being goalless at half-time though, there was no sign of any dissent from the Farnborough supporters, who all seemed to be appreciative of what Graham Wesley had managed so far this season, even if they weren't exactly chanting his name very often. That was all a far cry from when he first took over though, as a change of the traditional Farnborough Town colours from yellow and blue to red and white, the naming of their Cherrywood Road ground to the Amiter Stadium, and the constant use of his own semi-poetic motivational phrases were all dismissed as crackpot ideas at the time, and were met with much hostility. However, winning the Ryman League Premier Division title was what really mattered, and left-back Justin Gregory maintained Farnborough's momentum towards that goal just a minute after the break, when he gave them the lead with a superbly placed shot into the far corner, as the Maidenhead defence presumably failed to realise that his right foot was probably even stronger than his left. With Maidenhead drifting down towards the relegation places, they couldn't just sit back and accept defeat by trying to keep the score down, and as they pushed forward, Farnborough hit them with a second goal in the 52nd minute when Scott Corbett's low shot went through a crowd of players and sneaked into the bottom corner. In fact, Corbett was just a whisker away from his second and Farnborough's third just 4 minutes later, when he showed far more determination than Maidenhead's defenders to get his head to Jimmy Dack's cross, but the ball bounced agonisingly wide. Both sides then made a substitution apiece, with Ian Baird coming on for Farnborough in place of Steve Darlington, who was still trying to regain full fitness after a long injury lay-off earlier in the season. However, Gary Crawshaw was certainly looking sharp, and he had another chance to get on the score sheet in the 65th minute when he outpaced defender Brian Connor from Jimmy Dack's excellent through ball, but keeper Barnard eventually made another good save despite being a bit slow to realise the danger at first. Barnard, though, was definitely keeping Maidenhead in the match, and he denied Crawshaw for a fourth time just a minute later with another good block before getting rather lucky with the rebound, as Ian Baird and then Lenny Piper were unable to capitalise. It was certainly a good spell of pressure from Farnborough though, and it paid off in the 67th minute when they went 3-0 up, although it was a rather fortunate ricochet right back near the halfway line off Scott Corbett's shins that put Lenny Piper clean through, but he still did really well to round keeper Barnard and ignore the attempted challenge from behind of defender Tim Cook to slide the ball over the line. Piper, though, didn't do so well 2 minutes later when he spoilt Mickey Warner's perfect cross with a badly mistimed header, and that actually saw him being substituted just seconds later, although his brother Chris was already waiting on the touchline to replace him anyway as it sailed wide. In fact, another one of Farnborough's younger players, Tony Taggart, was given a run out as well shortly afterwards to give Jimmy Dack a breather, as they were really cruising now, and indeed Maidenhead's hopeless situation was made worse in the 87th minute when they were reduced to 10 men when midfielder Chris Ferdinand limped off, as they'd already used all their 3 substitutes by that time. Ironically though, just as Ferdinand departed, Maidenhead pulled a goal back as soon as play restarted, as Farnborough defender Barry Laker was uncharacteristically beaten in the air by a near-post flick-on from substitute Mickey Crichton's in-swinging corner, leaving Lee Channell to get ahead of his marker Darren Ennan and head in almost on the goal line. However, Farnborough hit back just a minute later to make the scoreline a more accurate reflection of how the game had gone, although it may well have been Maidenhead defender Steve Croxford who got the final touch to send the ball looping past keeper Barnard, after Ian Baird had initially and far more clearly got his toe to Mickey Warner's cross shot. That made it 4-1, which indeed was how it finished, as Farnborough once again ruthlessly demonstrated how not to slip up against lower to mid-table opposition, who of course have meagre resources in comparison. It was now a question of whether any of Farnborough's nearest rivals for the title could show the same sort of professionalism when they took on weak opposition, and the following Tuesday night's fixture between Enfield and Farnborough's bitter local rivals Aldershot Town would be a good indicator of that. In fact, Enfield were now fielding an even weaker side than the one that Farnborough comfortably beat 3-0 10 days earlier, as skipper Wayne Brown was now out injured, and even more of their better players had since been sold to ease their financial problems. That saw 2 more new players in the cheaply acquired Curtis Johnson and Shane Chandler making their debuts in this match, but Aldershot on the other hand had such a strong squad available that they could once again afford to leave out such big money signings as Stafford Brown, Wayne Andrews, Simon Allathorne and Lee Prothero, although their continued absence wasn't actually being appreciated by the Aldershot supporters. That was because their side had only won once in their last 6 matches, so some of the players who had been regulars in the starting lineup obviously hadn't been pulling their weight. However, apparently that didn't apply to Mark Bentley, and indeed the former Enfield midfielder burst through a big gap in the home defence as early as the 2nd minute, only to be denied by a good save from keeper Jerome John. However, Aldershot keeper Andy Pape had to make an equally good save a few minutes later when Danny Jones set up Lee Allen for the sort of clear-cut chance that Enfield failed to create all match against Farnborough. Indeed, Enfield even managed to take the lead after only 13 minutes when Pape rather fumbled Shane Chandler's volley from Matthew Bird's free kick, and the determined Jones nipped in ahead of defender Ryan Kirby to convert the rebound. No doubt Aldershot just considered that as being a minor setback though, and that their extra quality would shine through later on in the match, and their cause was certainly helped in the 18th minute when Enfield keeper Jerome John broke his arm in a collision with Aldershot forward Grant Payne. And with the Ryman League only allowing 3 substitutes to be named instead of 5, it was an outfield player, David McDonald, who had to come on and replace him, with more than 3/4 of the match still remaining. Needless to say, McDonald was well caught out when it came to his first real test from Mark Graham's corner in the 29th minute, as he was left stranded when Gary Abbott connected with a powerful header, but Curtis Johnson was on hand to clear off the line. Of course, Enfield's outfield players were now starting to raise their game in a valiant attempt to protect their goalkeeper, and that actually saw them force Aldershot into a succession of wayward long-range shots until the last minute of the first half, when Enfield found themselves a bit undermanned in trying to deal with Mark Graham's free kick, with defender Dave Reddington off the pitch after receiving treatment, and that saw Owen Cole getting a goal-bound glancing header, but standing keeper McDonald somehow managed to claw the ball away from the on-rushing Ryan Kirby right on the goal line. That saw Enfield preserve their 1-goal lead until half-time, a fact that annoyed Aldershot manager George Borg so much that he ended up bringing on all 3 of his substitutes within the first 5 minutes of the second half. However, the only Aldershot player who seemed fired up enough for Borg's liking was midfielder Mark Bentley, but this wild challenge on the conveniently nimble Vas Soteriou in the 61st minute only resulted in an inevitable booking and not the equalising goal that Borg desperately needed. In fact, Aldershot played so poorly that it wasn't until the 90th minute that they managed their first shot on target in the whole of the second half, and even then Ryan Kirby's effort was competently dealt with by standing keeper David McDonald. Indeed, Aldershot even failed to capitalise when he threw the ball straight back to them after getting too overconfident, as Grant Payne chipped wide of what was more or less an open goal. By now, the Enfield supporters were having a right laugh at how Aldershot, who of course included a number of former Enfield players, had failed to score against a side without a proper keeper, and they were really in hysterics in the second minute of injury time when one of those former players, goalkeeper Andy Pape, did a total air shot in trying to clear, with substitute Ronnie Watson bearing down on him, and therefore had to desperately dive on the ball to stop Watson making it 2-0. Presumably though, referee Eric Mackerel and his assistants were so busy laughing themselves that they totally forgot that it was Aldershot's Ryan Kirby who had actually touched the ball last. However, the free kick for a back pass, which would have wasted some valuable time, wasn't needed in the end, as Enfield held out comfortably enough anyway to gain one of the shock results of the season, considering they'd lost their last 5 matches, in addition to losing their Southbury Road Stadium, all their best players and the large majority of their supporters. As for Aldershot, this result really killed off their title challenge, and many of their supporters had already been calling for manager George Borg's head, even before this result, and it was no wonder that he just sat forlornly in the dugout at the final whistle, leaving his assistant Stuart Cash to carry out the obligatory handshakes with the opposition. There was no doubt that the continuing success of their local rivals Farnborough was now really starting to destroy Aldershot's challenge, as their supporters had become extremely envious of Farnborough's position in the table and were putting too much pressure on their own players to succeed, thereby destroying their confidence in the process. However, there was no such pressure like that at Farnborough, maybe because the expectations hadn't been quite so high in the first place, and that was resulting in a really happy atmosphere both on and off the pitch, especially when they stretched their lead at the top to 13 points after 2 more comfortable victories at home to Harrow Borough and away to Dulwich Hamlet, before they took on second from bottom Croydon on the 3rd of March, hoping to make it 10 league wins in a row. The key to it all, though, was quite likely the fact that Farnborough had no real problems with injuries or suspensions, and that allowed Graham Wesley to field an unchanged starting line-up for the 4th match running, whereas other sides at the top were chopping and changing their line-ups every week for one reason or another, and that was causing a lot of inconsistency. Croydon's problems so far this season, though, had been caused by manager Ken Jarvie's decision to rely mainly on the players that got them promoted to the Premier Division for the first time in their history at the end of the previous season, and their inexperience was now starting to tell, having failed to win in their previous 6 matches. However, it was the blustery gale-force wind that seemed to be the main cause of Farnborough getting in a shot on target after only 2 minutes, as Croydon keeper James Wastell sliced a clearance which blew backwards into Gary Crawshaw's path, but Wastell was alert enough to tip away Steve Darlington's resulting shot from Crawshaw's low cross. Despite that chance though, Farnborough generally had trouble getting their passing going early on as they tried to come to terms with the strong wind, but as their defence had only conceded 3 goals in their last 9 matches, they were confident of keeping a clean sheet at the back and then scoring at least 1 goal at some stage of the match. However, it was Croydon who actually took the lead after 22 minutes when their 19-year-old former Farnborough youth team striker Nick McDonnell controlled Chris Dixon's cross and in one movement hooked the ball in past an unsighted Stuart McKenzie. Although it was quite impressive, only about 20 people cheered that goal, which was Croydon's players, their coaching staff and 1 or 2 directors in the main stand. And it was their lack of support which was always going to give them a problem in this division, as it meant they didn't have the money to buy players of the calibre of Gary Crawshaw, Steve Darlington or Lenny Piper, who all combined well for Farnborough with some neat passing in the 25th minute, but Piper had just strayed offside according to the linesman and the goal was ruled out. By now though, Farnborough had got used to the strength of the wind at their backs and Jimmy Dack really took advantage of that in the 30th minute when his free kick was flighted just right to deceive keeper Wastell, although he still should have got something on it to stop Barry Laker equalising with a free header into an empty net. With Croydon playing almost a 4-5-1 formation though, Farnborough couldn't find another goal before half-time and there was always a chance that they might also struggle against the wind in the second half. However, the wind did them a favour in the 58th minute when it held up Jimmy Dack's long ball perfectly for Gary Crawshaw to run onto, but after he was foiled by an excellent challenge from Croydon's Ben Judge, Scott Corbett kept his head really well to set up Steve Darlington for a good finish to put Farnborough 2-1 up, and after that there was only going to be one winner and that was the home side. Indeed, Gary Crawshaw then added a third goal 11 minutes later with the ball actually deflecting in off the heel of Croydon defender Mark Dickinson after a seemingly unintentional headed flick on from Lenny Piper had set up the chance. That killed the game off really, and after that it was just a case of giving a number of substitutes a run out at various stages in the last 20 minutes, with the only decent chance created by either side coming in the 76th minute, when Mickey Warner, who'd now been pushed up into midfield, hit a cross shot narrowly wide of the far post. That would have made Farnborough's win even more emphatic, which was what manager Graham Westley had actually been calling for before the game, as he'd been getting concerned that his side were getting too complacent in front of goal and should be beating these teams in the lower half of the table by much bigger margins. Indeed, he had the same complaint when his side beat bottom club Dulwich Hamlet 3-0 the following Tuesday night, as he felt the gap in quality between the players on view was worthy of a 6-0 win at least if everyone gave 100%. After 7 games in a row against virtually the worst teams in the division though, Farnborough finally faced a legitimately tough challenge on Saturday the 10th of March when they made the long journey to the heart of Essex to face 5th placed Heybridge Swifts. Indeed, in forward Simon Parker and particularly Chris Lee, Heybridge had 2 players who were much coveted by nationwide league clubs, and they were bound to give Farnborough's defence something to think about for a change. With midfielder Scott Corbett unavailable and forward Steve Darlington now out for the rest of the season, Farnborough were also not at full strength for this game, but presumably the reason for bringing defender Tim O'Shea into the starting lineup for the first time in 11 league matches was so that they could field an identical 3-5-2 formation to Heybridge rather than trying to go for a draw, as Mickey Warner and Justin Gregory were good attacking players anyway and wouldn't just sit back and defend all match. Heybridge, though, had only lost once in their last 8 league and cup matches, and that was because they fielded a reserve side, so the first 20 minutes or so of this match were predictably tight until Ian Baird suddenly showed a bit of quality for Farnborough to force Heybridge keeper Kingsley Banks into a good save with his legs. Despite being 36 now, Baird was still looking sharp and no doubt keen to claim a regular place in the starting lineup for the remainder of the season, with Steve Darlington out injured, and he did his cause no harm at all in the 31st minute when he gave Farnborough the lead after once again wrong-footing defender Mark Keane, but this time finishing emphatically despite the bobbly pitch, which may even have helped him beat keeper Banks. It was a good start to the match for Farnborough then, and indeed it wasn't until the 34th minute that Heybridge showed what they were capable of, as skipper Gary Waters made a clever run to get on the end of Chris Payne's corner, but Farnborough keeper Stuart Mackenzie anticipated well and made the save look easy. Of course, one of the problems of filming at non-league grounds is that they don't all have a purpose-built unobstructed vantage point like the one on the stand roof at Farnborough, and at Heybridge we had to put up with a view from ground level and with numerous pillars in the way. Unfortunately then, Mickey Warner decided to score arguably the most spectacular goal ever seen by a Farnborough player at just such a ground, when in the 38th minute he latched onto a defensive header with a volley that flew into the net so fast that it would have sent the needle for Andy Gray's timing device for miles per hour off the scale had it been used to record it. Unfortunately though, we are not Sky Sports and can't afford to have cameras dotted all around the ground, and when Gary Waters got so much height and distance on his header it disappeared out of view above the stand roof from our position, and the next we saw of the ball it was lying in the back of the net. Nevertheless, it was still a moment to savour, and it was a topic of conversation amongst Farnborough supporters for several weeks afterwards, and certainly won't be forgotten. Although that put Farnborough 2-0 up, Heybridge couldn't be written off just yet, and one half of their highly rated strike force gave Farnborough a warning in the 39th minute as Simon Parker struck a shot which flashed just wide from the edge of the area, with keeper Mackenzie beaten. 2-0 was how it stayed until half-time though, but Farnborough managed to make a good start to the second half as well, when Lenny Piper forced keeper Kingsley Banks into an unorthodox save just 3 minutes after the break. In fact, Banks then had to make another good save in the 51st minute to stop a shot from Gary Crawshaw after another swift move, and it was looking as if Farnborough had certainly gone up a gear and raised themselves for this match. However, a spate of substitutions midway through the half may have seen them lose their concentration a bit in the 69th minute, when Heybridge midfielder John Pollard was left unmarked following a corner, but he headed well over the bar when he really should have hit the target. With Heybridge throwing men forward though, Farnborough were looking really dangerous on the break, and Gary Crawshaw found more space in the 74th minute from substitute Chris Piper's through ball to test keeper Banks again, but the pitch was so heavy it was difficult to get enough power into shots of that nature. However, skipper Steve Watson was able to have more of a run-up onto Piper's pass a minute later, and that saw Farnborough go 3-0 up, although it was some very slack defending by Heybridge substitute Colin Wall in the first place that allowed Gary Crawshaw to win possession. After that, Heybridge now needed something special from their strike force if they wanted to get back into the game, and they certainly got that in the 79th minute when Chris Lee smashed in a fierce volley, which Stuart Mackenzie did well to get a hand to in the Farnborough goal. That made it 3-1, and Heybridge then made it a nervous last few minutes for Farnborough by pulling another goal back in the 84th minute after Farnborough substitute Tony Taggart gave the ball straight to Heybridge midfielder John Pollard, resulting in a move which culminated in Simon Parker tapping in the rebound after Stuart Mackenzie had initially made a good save to deny substitute Terry Warwick. However, Farnborough pulled themselves together for the last 6 minutes to complete a 3-2 victory without any further scares, and it avenged the 1-0 defeat that Heybridge inflicted on them back at the Amateur Stadium earlier on in the season. Indeed, with this result making it 12 league wins in a row for Farnborough and putting them 16 points clear at the top of the table, most teams in the division had now more or less conceded that nobody would catch them now, even with 11 matches still to go. Maybe the only thing that could stop Farnborough's momentum was the almost incessant rain that had fallen during the season so far, as that had resulted in numerous Ryman League matches being postponed week after week, and it was Farnborough's turn to suffer after the Heybridge match when they had to wait 2 weeks before they could play their next fixture away to lowly Harrow Borough. Harrow's side for this match included former Farnborough striker Pat Gavin, but he was only one of 4 Harrow players with any real experience at this level, as the majority of their line-up, including their 3 substitutes, had all been signed fairly recently from lower league clubs. Of course, Farnborough, on the other hand, fielded a line-up of top-quality non-league players as usual, but although Scott Corbett returned after missing the Heybridge match, his fellow midfielder Steve Watson was now ruled out with an ankle injury that he'd suffered in training during the week. Manager Graham Westley therefore decided to keep defender Tim O'Shea in the starting line-up as a stand-in skipper and stick with the 3-5-2 formation that won at Heybridge, even though that system hadn't looked quite so tight defensively. Corbett, though, was lucky not to end up missing some more games when he was the victim of a dreadful challenge by Harrow defender Christian Hislop after just 8 minutes, an assault that Hislop was quite rightly booked for by referee Clive Penton, although a red card might even have been produced if it had happened a bit later on in the game. With Harrow trying to avoid relegation, but with teams below them having games in hand, perhaps they were getting a bit too desperate to win. But Farnborough ignored all that and they managed to take the lead after 13 minutes when Ian Baird cleverly headed down Mickey Warner's cross for Lenny Piper to beat Harrow keeper David Hook from close range. Despite going behind though, Harrow seemed to be using the familiar time-wasting tactic of many less well-off non-league teams in deliberately having the minimum number of match balls available in the knowledge that they'd all end up being booted out of the ground at some stage, thereby causing a lengthy delay to proceedings. In fact, a combination of that, together with some more niggly fouls and a badly churned up pitch, meant there were no further clear-cut chances at either end for the rest of the half, nor indeed for the first 17 minutes of the second half either, in which 4 players were booked in quick succession by referee Penton, including Harrow's Adam Everett just 8 seconds after the restart. Once again though, it was Farnborough who made all the running when a chance did come, as Mickey Warner and Lenny Piper ignored the almost impossible to play on surface to pass and control the ball well enough to set up Scott Corbett for a shot which whistled narrowly wide. However, the introduction of Harrow's powerfully built substitute Cole Levine a minute later ended up making it a much more even contest, although Farnborough keeper Stuart McKenzie maybe should have held on to his free kick in the 65th minute, but the fumble resulted in an untidy scramble and a Harrow equaliser from somebody. The slow-motion replay clears things up though, as we could see that it was Mickey Warner's attempted clearance that hit an on-rushing Tim O'Shea on the shin, with the ball possibly heading in for an own goal until Harrow's number 2 Andy Rose got the final touch on the line to claim it. With Harrow having only just ended a dismal run of form which saw them win only once in their previous 16 league matches before their 2-1 victory against Sutton United in their most recent match, maybe they had now found an answer to their problems. But when Farnborough brought on midfielder Chris Piper for defender Tim O'Shea 2 minutes later and switched to a 4-4-2 formation, it swung the match back in their favour again, as Piper's free kick in the 68th minute somehow found its way through to Darren Annan, who regained the lead with an impressively accurate shot into the bottom corner for his first goal for the club. However, 1 or 2 of Harrow's lesser-known players had looked rather useful in this match, most notably substitute Cole Levine and their number 10 Paul Scott, and they were both involved when Harrow managed to equalise again just 4 minutes later, as Levine's deep cross was headed back by Pat Gavin for Scott to blast a well-controlled volley past keeper McKenzie from close range. It was now becoming a very entertaining match in stark contrast to the first half, and a winner was up for grabs for both sides. However, Gary Crawshaw put paid to any fanciful ideas that Harrow might get it when he put Farnborough 3-2 up in the 79th minute after Harrow defender Mark Walsh found himself caught out by Lenny Piper's accurate long ball. That saw Harrow become a bit demoralised, and when Farnborough brought on defender Mark Harper for forward Ian Baird, it tightened things up at the back and consequently saw Harrow hit on the break a few times in the last 10 minutes, although this effort from Scott Corbett, which rebounded off the foot of the post, was by far the closest Farnborough came to increasing their lead. However, the final score of 3-2 was good enough, as it now stretched Farnborough's run of league wins to 13. It was also a victory which was very much expected against a side near the bottom of the table, but Harrow's inexperience was more obvious after the final whistle, as their number 3 Adam Everett had presumably never played in front of a decent sized crowd before and didn't seem to realise that taking stick from opposition supporters is all part of the game at this level. Thanks to the thorough management and coaching skills of Graham Wesley and Graham Pearce though, Farnborough's players were a lot more professional and never looked likely to rise to the bait like that, and they were all as well prepared as usual for the following Saturday's home match against mid-table Hendon. In fact, the squad had now been strengthened for the final run-in with the on-loan signing of experienced conference striker Paul Fewings from Boston United as a replacement for the injured Steve Darlington, but he had to make do with a place on the substitutes bench for this game as Ian Baird kept his place in the starting line-up. However, Tim O'Shea was left out this time with Chris Piper coming in, so that meant a change back to the 4-4-2 formation which had conceded very little at the back during Farnborough's long winning run. Unlike many of Farnborough's more recent opponents though, Hendon were fielding a side packed with experienced players, many of whom had played in the conference or higher. Indeed, Hendon's disappointing position of 14th in the table was due to the fact that they'd suffered a lot more from postponements than any other club in the division, and therefore had a huge backlog of fixtures. And they proved that they weren't a bad side in the first half by restricting Farnborough to just 2 reasonable chances, the first of which came in the 20th minute when Mickey Warner perhaps fired his low cross a bit too hard at Gary Crawshaw, who couldn't adjust himself in time to divert the ball into an empty net. Farnborough's other chance of a scoreless first half though didn't come until the 38th minute when Jimmy Dack tried an ambitious shot from an acute angle which nearly surprised Hendon keeper Gary McCann at his near post, but perhaps a cross might have been a better idea. At least the home supporters got some entertainment at half-time though from the Farnborough Town mascot, which was presumably meant to be some sort of bug, although there was no mention of what its name was in the matchday programme. As for Hendon, they hadn't looked like scoring at all so far, so maybe some of their players had a bug, although it was more likely a lack of match practice after having so many games called off. That meant they couldn't afford to be reduced to 10 men, otherwise they'd have no chance, but they obviously should have been just 3 minutes after the break when Warren Kelly was adjudged to have fouled Ian Baird just as he was about to shoot, with only keeper McCann to beat. Referee Ward though didn't even reach for the yellow card, which incensed Farnborough manager Graham Wesley, who was out of his dugout moaning about the decision for a full 5 minutes afterwards. Wesley would have been even more annoyed had Hendon taken the lead from their first chance of the match 9 minutes later then, but thankfully Ross Pickett headed wide at the far post after getting on the end of Jason Solomon's unintentional flick-on. However, it was Farnborough who broke the deadlock in the 64th minute when Darren Annan's strangely looping free kick was headed on by both Barry Laker and Gary Crawshaw for Lenny Piper to volley in past keeper McCann, although surely he meant to strike the ball a bit cleaner into that far corner. Having seen his side take the lead, Farnborough manager Graham Wesley then decided to bring on new signing Paul Fewings 2 minutes later to save the legs of the ageing Ian Baird, and Fewings was to make quite an impact with Hendon now having to push up a bit more in search of an equaliser. Indeed, he showed some good pace in the 70th minute when he ran onto a mistimed defensive header from Darren Annan's long ball, but Hendon skipper Warren Kelly made a good clean challenge this time, although referee Ward didn't think so and wrongly awarded a goal kick. Of course, that started Graham Wesley off again on the touchline, but he calmed down a bit when one of the 2 substitutes he'd introduced so far, Tony Taggart, produced an excellent mazy run seconds later, which caused all sorts of panic in the Hendon defence, with the ball eventually falling to Paul Fewings again, who severely tested keeper McCann with a well-struck effort from close range. However, McCann made an even better save from Fewings in the 76th minute when he got down sharply to his left to turn aside a well-placed shot which was heading for the bottom corner. But the Hendon defence was now starting to get torn apart, and a second goal for Farnborough really looked on the cards. Indeed, it came just seconds later from the resulting corner when defender Barry Laker, who was actually skipper for the day, showed his prowess in the air by leaping a good foot higher than three Hendon defenders to make it 2-0 and virtually kill the game off. However, Hendon did have a rare chance just a minute later when substitute Dale Binns took advantage of a stumble by Darren Annan to race in on goal, but keeper Stuart Mackenzie was well positioned to make a decent save. Although Binns had looked quite lively since he came on, it was Farnborough's two substitutes, Tony Taggart and Paul Fewings, who had really turned the game, and they both caused the Hendon defence problems again in the 79th minute, when Taggart somehow managed to get through on the left before a clever piece of skill from Gary Crawshaw set up Fewings for another shot at goal, which again forced keeper McCann into an excellent save. Hendon then tried to stop the rot by making a double substitution shortly afterwards, but it had no effect, and 2-0 was the final outcome after yet another ruthless performance from Farnborough, in which they proved that they could knock over teams in mid-table or just above, in addition to the strugglers at the bottom of the division. In fact, it was another mid-table side of similar ability to Hendon that Farnborough were up against next the following Saturday as they travelled to Hitchin Town. Despite losing 5-2 at home to Aldershot in their previous match though, Hitchin manager Andy Melvin decided to keep exactly the same side, which obviously sounded like good news for Farnborough. Graham Wesley though made one change to his line-up, with Tony Taggart preferred to Chris Piper after his impressive performance after coming on as a substitute against Hendon, but Ian Baird managed to keep his place in the starting 11 ahead of Paul Fewings. Unfortunately, Hitchin's Topfield Stadium was one of those grounds where it was impossible to get a good vantage point to film the game from, but from what we could see it did look as if Farnborough were a bit lucky to get themselves out of trouble after just 8 minutes, when keeper Stuart Mackenzie got into a mess on the edge of his area and Barry Laker had to head Nathan Lamey's overhit cross off the line from under the crossbar, or so it appeared from this angle. However, Lamey definitely hit the target just seconds later as Hitchin kept the pressure on after the resulting corner, but Mackenzie looked a lot more convincing this time as he made an excellent save low down to his right. Farnborough pulled themselves together though and made sure they marked the lively Lamey a bit tighter after that, while at the other end they created the first chance of their own in the 11th minute when Ian Baird showed what he was in the side for with a clever-headed layoff to set up Gary Crawshaw, but he produced a poor first touch in front of goal and allowed Hitchin keeper James Robinson to smother the ball before defender Tim Allpress conceded a rather needless corner. Farnborough didn't make anything of it though, although their travelling supporters were having a good laugh at Allpress, who went and hoofed the ball out of the ground in similar fashion on 3 other occasions during the course of the first half, which suggested Hitchin's defenders were still shell-shocked after conceding 5 against Aldershot. However, midfielder Carl Williams couldn't be blamed when he gave away a penalty in the 15th minute, as Tony Taggart's attempted cross hit him on the arm from the sort of range which is normally interpreted as being too close and therefore an accidental contact. However, actually converting the spot kick was no formality, with that part of the penalty area being so churned up, but it didn't seem to bother Lenny Piper, who gave Farnborough the lead very convincingly. Although referee Gary Ives did Farnborough a favour there, he did give a strange decision against them in the 33rd minute when he booked Jimmy Dack for what appeared to be just an accidental collision with Hitchin's Carl Williams, in which Dack actually came out worse and needed a couple of minutes treatment. And indeed it was no wonder those 2 Farnborough supporters on the far side were laughing in disbelief. However, nobody from Farnborough was laughing 2 minutes later when the highly rated Cliff Accurane pounced on a slip by Barry Laker and rounded keeper Mackenzie quite impressively to equalise for Hitchin with a good finish. Once again though, Farnborough answered back by producing a clear-cut chance of their own shortly afterwards when Gary Crawshaw forced Hitchin's Rob Keane into a mistake in the 40th minute, which led to Crawshaw himself collecting Lenny Piper's brilliant backheel pass, and when the ball then fell conveniently into the path of Jimmy Dack just 6 yards out, it seemed a certain goal, but somehow it ended up sailing high over the stand roof, and on this occasion it didn't look as if the pitch was to blame either. That meant a 1-1 half-time scoreline, which was probably quite accurate in terms of the balance of play, but it was Farnborough who had the first good effort of the second half when Mickey Warner curled a free kick narrowly wide, with Hitchin keeper James Robinson appearing to be a bit overconfident. Hitchin, though, had already shown in this match that they were a lot better defensively than that 5-2 defeat to Aldershot suggested, and indeed they'd been inconsistent like that all season. Unfortunately for Farnborough, this was one of Hitchin's better days, and because of that it was starting to look as if Farnborough's run of 14 wins in a row might come to an end here. And despite Graham Wesley bringing on all three substitutes at various stages in the second half in an effort to break the deadlock, that free kick from Mickey Warner ended up being the only decent shot at goal from either side after the break until the 83rd minute. However, that was when Jimmy Dack made up for his horrendous miss in the first half by regaining the lead with a tap-in from a similar sort of range after substitute Paul Fewings had hit the angle of post and crossbar following a convenient collision in the Hitchin defence. Of course, that clearly eased Farnborough's nerves and really lifted them for the last 7 minutes or so, especially Dack, who almost made it 3-1 in the 86th minute with a superbly struck long-range shot, which forced an excellent save from keeper Robinson. In fact, Scott Corbett then nearly got in on the act as well just 2 minutes later with a good header from Jimmy Dack's corner, but Hitchin midfielder Rob Keane stuck out a leg on the goal line to knock the ball away. Hitchin, though, had rarely threatened the Farnborough goal at all during the second half, and once Farnborough had gone 2-1 up, there was never a chance of Hitchin putting a stop to their long winning run. Indeed, it turned out to be a fairly comfortable win in the end, mainly thanks to Jimmy Dack's determination, and he was therefore rightly acclaimed by the visiting supporters as their hero for the day. Maybe Lenny Piper was running him close though, and indeed Piper managed to get on the score sheet for the 4th game in a row as Farnborough made it 16 wins from their last 16 league matches by beating Hendon 2-0 at Claremont Road the following Monday night. However, the victory was marred by striker Ian Baird breaking his ankle, so that was another one of Farnborough's forwards out for the rest of the season, and maybe a lack of firepower up front might make their next match at home to Slough Town the following Saturday a harder match to win than it would have been normally. However, Paul Fewings was now able to get his chance in the starting line-up, while the midfield was strengthened by the return after injury of skipper Steve Watson. But Slough were fielding a very experienced side and needed to win just as badly as Farnborough, as they'd slumped down to second from bottom in the table and were in grave danger of relegation. That predicament had come about mainly because of off-the-field problems which included the non-payment of players' wages, but that had now been resolved and Slough could now concentrate on their survival battle on the pitch in terms of staying in the Premier Division, and indeed they made it hard for Farnborough early on by battling for every ball until Gary Crawshaw suddenly had a chance to give Farnborough the lead in the 19th minute when he beat a dodgy offside trap to go clean through on goal from Jimmy Dack's through ball, but then chipped high and wide with only keeper Steve Mortone to beat and an unmarked Scott Corbett waiting for a simple tap-in. In fact, when keeper Mortone was finally asked to do something in the 25th minute, he made rather a hash of it by bringing down Lenny Piper for an obvious penalty and earning himself a booking from referee Jay Beadle in the process. Whether the J stood for Jeremy, or indeed if Mortone should be pronounced Mortone, we don't really know, as that sort of detailed information is always difficult to obtain in non-league football, but whatever his name was, the Slough keeper was certainly popular with his teammates when he made up for his error by keeping out Lenny Piper's spot kick. Of course, that only made Slough battle even harder, and Farnborough were almost caught out at the back because of that in the 30th minute, when Leon Townley's rather unintentional through ball found striker Paul Coombs, who rounded keeper Stuart McKenzie quite well, but found Justin Gregory getting back to put him off, just in the nick of time from Farnborough's point of view. However, Farnborough were lucky that Slough were missing their top scorer Dwight Marshall, who was out injured for this match, as he may well have buried this clear-cut chance they created in the 33rd minute, but Paul Coombs badly mistimed his header right in front of goal to spoil Junior Haynes' good approach work. Although Farnborough had missed two great chances themselves, Slough had already shown enough to prove that this would be a tougher match for the league leaders than if they were facing a mid-table side, simply because Slough had something more than pride to play for. And after a scoreless first half, the next chance of the match didn't come until the 60th minute, when Gary Crawshaw showed some good skill to control and volley Scott Corbett's pass, but Mortone, as I think we'll call him, showed some good handling low down to his left. However, that was a comfortable save compared to the one he had to make just a minute later, as Jimmy Dack showed good anticipation of where Scott Corbett's cross might end up to run in and fire a well-struck shot towards the bottom corner, but Mortone made an excellent stop to palm the ball away. Dack, though, was substituted shortly afterwards along with skipper Steve Watson, who came off 10 minutes later, as Farnborough manager Graham Westley brought on two players in Tony Taggart and Chris Piper with maybe a bit more skill and ability from an attacking viewpoint, but without Dack and Watson's experience or ball-winning capabilities. However, the gamble certainly paid off in the 74th minute when Taggart produced a perfect cross to the far post for Gary Crawshaw to get on the end of to give Farnborough the lead at last. Of course, with Slough now having to throw men forward after that, it left their defence vulnerable to quick counter-attacks, something which Lenny Piper seems to thrive on as he rarely gets picked up in those sort of situations. But after Tony Taggart set him up from one such run in the 79th minute, keeper Mortone came to Slough's rescue again with a good block with his legs. By now, though, Graham Westley had brought on defender Tim O'Shea for forward Paul Fewings to try and tighten up at the back and hold on to their 1-0 lead. But that meant that most of the game was now being played in Farnborough's half of the pitch, and there was more chance of free kicks being given away on the edge of the area because of that. Presumably then, Farnborough didn't realise that Slough's Dave Rainford was more than capable of hitting the target from there, and they had to be thankful that keeper Stuart Mackenzie was alert enough to make what was his first real save of the match. Although Farnborough had stretched their lead at the top of the table to an incredible 24-point margin because of their 16 wins in a row, they still had a few more games left before they could clinch the title, because some of the teams below them had so many games in hand they could quite feasibly catch Farnborough if they started slipping up. Farnborough really needed to win this match then and keep their run going just in case, but Slough put a spanner in the works in the 86th minute when, after a long spell of pressure, Paul Harracliffe managed to fire in a decent effort at goal, which Stuart Mackenzie did brilliantly to tip away. But unfortunately, defender Tim O'Shea was still admiring the save when Slough substitute Elias Backsham crossed from the rebound, leaving Paul Coombs totally unmarked to equalise. With only one forward on the pitch now, Farnborough didn't have much hope of finding a winner in the 4 minutes plus injury time remaining, and so it proved in the end, as Slough's fierce determination to avoid relegation saw them hold on to put a stop to Farnborough's winning run at last. That was very much a shock result though, as it was expected that the team who might be the ones to put an end to Farnborough's winning run would be their local rivals Aldershot in the heat of a local derby. And sure enough, that game 2 days later on Bank Holiday Monday did end in a draw, although we can't show you the action from that because it was covered by various television companies instead. In fact, we also missed the game at home to 6th place Chesham United 4 days later, although maybe that was just as well, as it was Farnborough's first goalless draw of the season in the league and was a pretty poor match by all accounts. However, 3 draws in a row was a bit of a worry for Farnborough manager Graham Westley, and his side therefore badly needed to get back to winning ways in their next match at home to mid-table St Albans City. Unfortunately though, the squad was becoming more and more diminished, as Jimmy Dack and Paul Fewings were now out injured as well, possibly until the end of the season. So that saw manager Westley fielding a 3-5-2 formation for this match, with Mark Harper in defence, Bruno Mendonca in attack and forward Rodney Lynch named as a substitute, all 3 of these players having chalked up only a handful of appearances between them during the season so far. St Albans City, though, were perhaps ideal opposition for Farnborough at this stage, as they were stuck in mid-table when they'd started the season with much higher expectations. In addition to that, they also had a number of key players missing this match, with some of them being rested due to the fixture pile-up which had affected them along with most other clubs in the division. However, Farnborough had now had to play 4 games in 7 days, so their players would have been feeling tired as well, but at least they were being given plenty of encouragement by their supporters, which rather unusually included people of all ages amongst those who wanted to sing. No doubt Farnborough's coaching staff would have been working hard to motivate the players as well though, and it looked that way in the 11th minute when a really sharp 5-man move ended with Portuguese striker Bruno Mendonça having his goal-bound but rather unorthodox looking far post volley blocked by St Albans defender Nicky Ghiari, with keeper Richard Hurst struggling to get across his goal in time. In fact, it was then the height of Mendonça that caused problems in the St Albans defence from the resulting corner, as he headed narrowly over after easily outjumping defender Ben Andrews. It was already becoming clear that St Albans were there for the taking in this match though, and they had to rely on a dubious decision from referee Lee to get them out of trouble in the 18th minute when he disallowed a goal from Gary Crawshaw after wrongly adjudging that the collision between defender Ryan Moran and keeper Richard Hurst was caused by a push in the back from the Farnborough striker. That meant that Farnborough had to wait until the 31st minute for the inevitable opening goal, and from what had gone on so far it was no surprise that it came from a St Albans defensive mistake, as keeper Hurst collided with his other central defender Ben Andrews this time, leaving Bruno Mendonça with a fairly simple tap-in, albeit using the prostrate Hurst's head, hand and boot as a pinball machine in the process. However, Hurst did manage to make a reasonable save in the 39th minute when Farnborough defender Mark Harper came up to get a shot in from a corner, but he wasn't tested again for the rest of the half and Farnborough had to be content with just the 1-goal lead going in at the break. Harper though was to have Farnborough's first chance of the second half as well when he got in a header from Lenny Piper's corner this time, but sent it way over the bar despite having a clear run at the ball. However, Piper showed Harper how to find the net and in great style as well just 2 minutes later when he put Farnborough 2-0 up by keeping his composure superbly to wrong foot 2 St Albans defenders before sending keeper Hurst the wrong way from close range. With St Albans only naming 2 substitutes and having a 17-year-old and a converted defender as their forward line, there was no hope of them coming back into the match, and it was now just a case of how many Farnborough would get. And indeed they made it 3-0 just 4 minutes later when Lenny Piper tried his luck from long range and ended up scoring his second of the match thanks to a deflection off St Albans defender Ryan Moran. That saw Farnborough really turn on the style thereafter, and Scott Corbett was unlucky not to get on the score sheet a minute later with a spectacular volley, but keeper Hurst made a really good save this time despite the ball bouncing awkwardly in front of him. Of course, Farnborough were also looking threatening from corners as usual, with Lenny Piper's accuracy at taking them and the well-rehearsed training ground routines involving defenders coming up to make 180-degree runs, almost always resulting in an effort on target, invariably from Barry Laker, as indeed he managed in the 57th minute, but he was foiled on this occasion by another excellent save. That meant keeper Hurst had now made up for his errors in the first half, and he then went one better by foiling Farnborough again just 4 minutes later, after Gary Crawshaw had created a chance for himself with a brilliant piece of skill on the edge of the 6-yard box. However, Hurst wasn't finished there, and after a quiet passage of play for 20 minutes or so, he excelled himself again in the 85th minute with a good block at his near post from Scott Corbett, after more intelligent play from Lenny Piper had set up the chance. Of course, man of the match Piper was playing against his former club and would have loved to have scored a hat-trick, but it was wing-back Justin Gregory who rounded off the scoring in the last minute with the best goal of the game, as he smashed in an unstoppable free kick to make it 4-0. With the final whistle going immediately on the restart, it was a great way to finish the match, and overall it was probably one of Farnborough's better performances of the season so far, even if the opposition had just turned up to go through the motions. It was certainly a vital match for Farnborough to win though, as their only real challengers for the title, Canvey Island, had been winning virtually all of their matches as well, and were not out of the race just yet despite the 18-point margin. However, Canvey's chances of winning the title were really slim, simply because they were way behind on their fixtures, having suffered more than anyone else in the division from postponed matches caused by waterlogged pitches, while their success in reaching the FA Trophy final had also added to the problem. That now meant that they had to win all their remaining matches, including gaining a victory at Farnborough on the 1st of May, while assuming the worst in that Farnborough win their other two matches away to Billericay and then at home to Hampton and Richmond Borough on the last day of the season. If that happened though, it would go down to goal difference, and Farnborough were well clear in that respect, which meant a defeat for Canvey in their next match against Enfield and then a win for Farnborough at Billericay the following day would more or less end the contest. When it came to Canvey travelling to Boreham Wood to face Enfield in a hastily rearranged match on Friday the 27th of April then, their backlog of fixtures had become so severe that they now had to play every day of the week except the following Monday in order to fit in all their remaining games before the official end of the season on Saturday the 5th of May. So not surprisingly, they were furious that their proposal to extend the season was turned down by virtually all the other clubs in the league, who of course didn't have quite so much to play for. However, the main reason was money, of course, because most clubs couldn't afford to pay their players an extra 2 weeks' wages if the season was extended, and that undoubtedly included Enfield, who still had problems off the pitch due to their lack of support. However, they'd now improved on the pitch with 3 wins in their last 4 matches, but they needed to win this game to guarantee avoiding relegation without having to leave it until the last day. Canvey manager Jeff King now had to make a decision whether to concentrate on the FA Trophy final or still make an effort to field his strongest side in every match and go for the league title. But at least he was fortunate enough to have a big squad of quality players with no real injury problems to contend with, so he was able to make 4 changes to his lineup from their last match, with Peter Smith, Mick Bodley, Steve Tilson and Wayne Vaughan all coming in, none of whom were exactly unknowns at this level. That last match though, against Hampton and Richmond Borough 2 nights earlier, had actually ended up being abandoned due to a flooded pitch, while a torrential downpour just before kick-off had actually caused this fixture to be postponed originally just 24 hours earlier. So Canvey had basically been spending most of their time over the previous 2 days sitting on a coach going up and down the M25 in the rush hour on 2 totally wasted journeys. That meant that mental exhaustion would have been just as much a problem for them as all the physical exertion of having to play 7 games in the last 13 days, and that showed in the first half of this match, as there was only one worthwhile chance for either side in the scoreless first 45 minutes, although that maybe should have been taken by Enfield skipper Danny Jones, who blazed his shot high and wide from just inside the area when he had time to hit the target. Canvey though finally woke up and showed their class in the 60th minute when wing-back Chris Duffy made a good blindside run onto Steve Ward's perfect through ball to cross for Neil Gregory, but he produced an even worse miss than Enfield's Danny Jones managed in the first half. By now though, Canvey manager Jeff King had brought on all 3 substitutes at various stages in the first 15 minutes of the second half, as many of his players were presumably too tired to play a full 90 minutes, but that decision backfired on him in the 65th minute when his side were reduced to 10 men for the rest of the match, as defender Peter Smith limped off with what appeared to be a hamstring injury. However, a bad mistake by Enfield's inexperienced wing-back Adam Gant just a minute later gave Canvey's danger man Chris Duffy a great chance to nick a goal on the break, but keeper Kenny Addai read his mind and made a good save at his feet. Unfortunately though, the game started getting a bit niggly after that for some reason, and Enfield skipper Danny Jones was not surprisingly booked for this wild challenge on Canvey's Adam Miller, which was a bit of a risky thing to do with some of Canvey's supporters on the terraces looking more like bouncers from a typical Essex nightclub than the sort of anoraks you normally get at non-league matches. Jones, though, had actually undergone quite a transformation during the season, as a year or so ago he always played with his shirt tucked in, he had a neat crop of ginger hair, he was about 2 stones lighter, and he rarely flew into challenges like that. However, whatever the reason for his change of image, there was no denying his ability and the fact that he was clearly an inspiration in getting Enfield out of their relegation trouble, and that was proved in the 68th minute when he gave his side the lead after appearing from nowhere to pounce on the rebound after Lee Allen's shot had been blocked by the legs of Canvey keeper Ashley Harrison. Although he'd broken the deadlock though, Jones was lucky he didn't break something else in the 80th minute when he went in late on Canvey's Adam Miller again. But referee Jeff Russell didn't even think it was a foul, let alone send him off for a second bookable offence. Of course, that incensed the Canvey bench and a number of their supporters behind the dugouts, and the verbals between them and the Enfield coaching staff were still going on a minute later when Enfield defender Steve McGona totally caught Canvey out by going on a run all the way from the back, only to be foiled by an excellent last-ditch challenge by defender Steve Ward. However, Ward then seemed to think that McGona had dived to try and win a penalty, when in fact he'd only fallen over from the momentum of the challenge and wasn't claiming anything himself, even if the Enfield supporters were. But the needless hand in the face was actually spotted by referee Russell, who of course then had to give a penalty for that anyway, with Ward lucky to only receive a booking for it, considering that most referees overreact to that sort of thing and therefore whip a red card out. With Enfield's Danny Jones in such a fired-up mood then, there was no chance of him missing the resulting spot kick, although keeper Harrison didn't seem too bothered about trying to stop Enfield going 2-0 up. Although they did ride their luck at times in this match, Enfield had played well, especially defensively, and they'd certainly improved since they lost 3-0 at home to Farnborough back in February, with manager Tom Loiseau's various Anglo-Cypriots now getting used to the higher standard. Of course, Loiseau had now strengthened his side with the addition of a proven Anglo-Cypriot goalscorer at this level in George Georgiou, who had certainly done the business for Premier Division side Purfleet in recent seasons. And it was Georgiou who made it 3-0 to Enfield in the first minute of injury time, when he shook off Canvey defender Mick Bodley with a clever turn, and then maybe deserved the bit of luck he had with a deflection for being so positive. 3-0 was how it finished then, and if Canvey did go out to treat this match seriously, they made a right hash of it by missing two clear-cut chances before Enfield scored, then using all their substitutes a bit too early, and most importantly of all by giving away a crazy penalty thanks to a moment of madness by defender Steve Ward, and really they only had themselves to blame. Of course, that now meant that Farnborough just needed to win at Billericay the following day to be confirmed as Ryman League Premier Division champions, as their goal difference was so superior it would therefore be highly unlikely that Canvey would win all their remaining matches by big enough margins to overtake them if Farnborough lost 2 out of their last 3. Billericay, though, wouldn't be an easy team to beat, as although they were in 9th place and only had Pride to play for, they had only lost twice in their last 17 league games and were fielding a full-strength side for this match. Farnborough, though, still had the same players out injured who had missed the 4-0 win against St Albans in their last match, but their replacements had played well anyway, so manager Graham Wesley therefore fielded an unchanged lineup and formation. Despite it being quite a long journey for the Farnborough supporters, nearly 500 of them turned up with their balloons for this one in anticipation of a day of celebration, and that must have given the players a huge lift as they ran out onto the pitch. As for the Billericay supporters at the other end though, they were left looking rather bemused, as they had no chance of out-singing that lot. Maybe the shock of seeing their ground transformed into a sea of red and white put Billericay's players off as well then, as defender Jeff Woolsey totally missed his kick in trying to clear the ball after just 30 seconds to let Gary Crawshaw in, but his effort was neither a cross or a shot really, and the chance was wasted. However, Crawshaw then produced a worse miss in the 11th minute when, with keeper Gavin King stranded, he went and tackled himself instead of shooting into an almost unguarded net, although a strong blustery wind was starting to play a few tricks. In fact, the wind was slightly more in Billericay's favour, and that saw them get on top for a spell, with right-sided midfielder Russell Penn getting past Justin Gregory with a clever step-over in the 15th minute, but Stuart Mackenzie in the Farnborough goal was well positioned to block the shot. However, by the halfway stage of the first half, the wind had really whipped up with the accompaniment of torrential rain as well, and Mackenzie really had a problem because of that in the 27th minute when Billericay's Joe Baker caught him out with a clever free kick, which only went fractionally wide. Indeed, Farnborough weren't just being hampered by the wind, they also had more injury problems to contend with when Gary Crawshaw limped off with a pulled hamstring in the 33rd minute. So that saw midfielder Chris Piper come on, with Lenny Piper being pushed up into attack. That only gave Billericay more confidence though, and they kept the pressure up in the 36th minute when Dean Morris headed Stuart Mackenzie's weak punch back to Joe Baker. But with Mackenzie slithering about trying to redeem himself, Darren Annan came to the rescue with a courageous header off the line from Baker's fiercely struck shot. At that stage it looked as if Farnborough might have to wait another week before they could clinch the title, especially with only one recognised striker on the pitch. But Lenny Piper had other ideas when Bruno Mendonca flicked on Stuart Mackenzie's clearance into his path in the 41st minute, as there looked nothing on until Piper saw keeper Gavin King just slightly off his line and beat him with a brilliant lob to put Farnborough ahead. That was how it stayed until half-time, and of course that gave Farnborough renewed optimism for the second half, and Mark Harper nearly made it 2-0 9 minutes after the break when keeper King misjudged Lenny Piper's corner, but Dean Morris was on hand to clear Harper's free header off the line. Billericay though looked a lot more capable going forward than most of Farnborough's recent opponents, and they nearly equalised in the 59th minute when Paul Linger burst through from midfield to set up danger man Joe Baker. But although the chip was a clever piece of improvisation, he just overhit the ball too much and the chance went begging. However, Billericay did manage to find the net just 2 minutes later when Lee Williams got in front of defender Mark Harper to flash a glancing header into the far bottom corner from Russell Penn's cross and make it 1-1, which was a fair scoreline on the balance of play so far. With a draw not necessarily good enough for Farnborough to clinch the title at this match, manager Graham Westley then made what might have seemed a strange decision in the 69th minute by bringing off his only remaining forward Bruno Mendonca and replacing him in attack with midfielder Tony Taggart instead of his other available substitute, striker Rodney Lynch. However, Farnborough managed to regain the lead 7 minutes later anyway, thanks to another midfielder, Scott Corbett, who cleverly evaded Steve Dickinson's lunge before firing a superbly accurate shot past keeper King to make it 2-1 and really start off the celebrations. Of course, that really lifted the players as well, and Justin Gregory almost got in on the act in the 80th minute when he intercepted an attempted crossfield pass from Billericay's Lee Williams and skipped inside defender Jeff Woolsey onto his right foot, but keeper King read his intentions and was well positioned. Indeed, the celebrations of those Farnborough supporters behind the goal really started getting manic when news started filtering through that Canvey Island were losing at Croydon, which of course wasn't all that surprising when they'd only just walked off the pitch at Boreham Wood 18 hours earlier after losing to Enfield. However, the Farnborough players kept their concentration until the end to record the win they needed, although when the final whistle went they weren't quite sure themselves that Canvey Island had lost until the away supporters all streamed onto the pitch a few seconds later to confirm it, and then the party really began. Of course, the destiny of the title had never really been in doubt once Farnborough went on that run of 16 wins in a row, plus the fact that Canvey Island had no hope of winning something like 12 matches in 15 days, so manager Graham Westley and his players and coaching staff weren't exactly leaping about at the end as if they'd won a cup final with a goal in the last minute, although they not surprisingly did have big smiles on their faces. The supporters, though, had been sampling the beer in the Billericay clubhouse for several hours before this match, which was why they were quite prepared to be a bit more outrageous by stripping down to the waist, and even underpants in some cases, to celebrate as soon as Scott Corbett scored the winner in the 76th minute, even though the weather was absolutely atrocious for late April, with the temperature hovering around the freezing mark. In fact, even club football secretary Vince Williams seemed to be thinking of discarding his shirt, glasses, tie and club blazer in the middle of all that lot. Such were the scenes of elation down there at the end. With virtually everyone involved with the club taking some part in drinking the Billericay clubhouse dry straight after that match, Farnborough's next game at home to Canvey Island the following Tuesday night might have come a bit too soon in terms of recovering from hangovers, but of course the outcome of this fixture was now irrelevant anyway. Graham Westley then, with all his strikers, including Bruno Mendonca, either not 100% fit or out for the rest of the season with long-term injuries, was therefore able to experiment with his forward line for this match by putting defender Mark Harper and midfielder Lenny Piper up front, while youngsters Chris Piper and Tony Taggart were now getting plenty of experience by being named in the starting lineup in wide positions. Canvey manager Jeff King, meanwhile, made 5 changes to the side that drew 0-0 at Basingstoke 2 days earlier in a Sunday match, but this was by all accounts quite close to the sort of side he might be fielding in their forthcoming FA Trophy final against Forest Green Rovers. So although Canvey had now failed to win in their last 5 league matches, it did look as if they were treating this fixture very seriously. If so, there were 2 reasons for that. Firstly, so that they could prove that they were better than Farnborough and would have won the league if it wasn't for the weather. And secondly, and perhaps more accurately, they were rightly treating Farnborough as a similar standard of opposition to that they'd be facing in the FA Trophy final. However, Farnborough looked a shadow of their normal selves early on, and maybe they had been celebrating too much as Canvey soon took control, with defender Mick Bodley going close after 9 minutes with a near-post header from Adam Miller's corner. In fact, when Canvey took the lead just 3 minutes later, it was a very tired-looking swing of the leg from Farnborough's Justin Gregory that resulted in Chris Duffy's cross sneaking into the far corner, with keeper Stuart McKenzie obviously expecting him to volley the ball away quite easily, not miss it completely. Unfortunately though, Gregory then had another nightmare after only 14 minutes when he somehow injured himself in an innocuous looking challenge with Canvey's Adam Miller, and on being x-rayed later in hospital was found to have a broken leg just above the ankle. Indeed, things then almost went from bad to worse for Farnborough, as while substitute Bruno Mendonca was getting ready to come on and replace Gregory, Canvey took advantage of the space Gregory had vacated to build up a move which forward Andy Jones really should have finished off with a decent shot, rather than the half-scuffed and feeble effort he directed straight at Farnborough skipper Steve Watson. Although Canvey had been having to play a match virtually every day for the past week or so, they did actually have a night off 24 hours earlier, and maybe that made a big difference to them, as they looked really sharp again in the 23rd minute when a slick 4-man move ended with midfielder Mickey Bennett running through to try and chip Stuart McKenzie. But the big Farnborough keeper did well and didn't deserve to have to face the corner that was wrongly awarded by a linesman standing 60 yards away. However, Canvey didn't make anything of that, but they certainly made the most of a free kick that was awarded to them in the 25th minute as Adam Miller stepped up to hit an absolute screamer past the unsighted McKenzie to put his side 2-0 up. However, the Farnborough coaching staff, and particularly Graham Pearce, wouldn't have been too pleased with how the defensive wall disintegrated to allow that shot to go right through them. This was now becoming very embarrassing for Farnborough, but Chris Piper gave them some hope just a minute later when he pulled a goal back from their first shot of the match, although he needed a big deflection off the shin of Canvey's number 8, Mark Stimson, to do so. Although the official attendance for this match was 1,124, not many Canvey supporters had travelled, probably because they had no money left after having so many matches to watch in a short space of time. And in a way it was a shame that the title race didn't all hinge on this match, as it would have been a near capacity crowd and a fantastic atmosphere, especially with Farnborough now getting into the game thanks to Piper's goal. However, there still would have been a loud roar if Mark Harper had directed his header from Lenny Piper's free kick into the top corner in the 31st minute, but the ball went narrowly wide and Farnborough had to go in at half-time 2-1 down, with that being the last chance from either side in the first 45 minutes. Any thoughts that Canvey might start getting tired in the second half because of all the matches they'd had to play recently were dispelled in the 49th minute though, when they again looked sharper all round with some good passing and movement despite the soggy pitch caused by incessant rain during the day, and they were almost toying with Farnborough by the time Stuart McKenzie put a stop to it by keeping out Craig Davidson's awkwardly bouncing volley. In fact, Farnborough were really lucky not to find themselves going further behind a minute later when a header from Steve Clark crashed off the underside of the bar, with Darren Annan then having to survive heated handball appeals from the rebound before he could safely clear the danger. Thankfully for Farnborough though, Canvey seemed to settle for what they'd got after that and used the rest of the game to give all their substitutes a run out, as did Farnborough with Rodney Lynch coming on in the 73rd minute, who maybe had good reason to feel a bit peeved that he hadn't been given more of a chance with so many injuries to Farnborough's other forwards. However, maybe Graham Wesley was justified in thinking Lynch was still too inexperienced, as he didn't really have a sniff of a chance when he came on, but neither did any other Farnborough player in the whole of the second half, and it was Canvey defender Steve Ward who came the closest to scoring for Farnborough when he forced his own keeper Ashley Harrison into a desperate clearance with his head just outside his area, with both an overhit back pass and a lack of communication, but neither Lenny Piper or Scott Corbett could capitalise on that when Mark Harper tried to set them up from the loose ball. 2-1 to Canvey was how it finished then, and Farnborough's 21-match unbeaten run in the league had now been ended, although of course that didn't matter too much and it was probably a predictable result for many people, with Canvey trying to prove a point and half of Farnborough's side out injured. The final game of the season for Farnborough on Saturday the 5th of May then was all about celebrating the season as a whole, and whether they could beat Hampton and Richmond Borough or not was again, like the Canvey Island game, rather irrelevant. Of course, Justin Gregory was now out of the Farnborough side because of injury in addition to all the others, but at least Jimmy Dack was able to return to the starting lineup along with Paul Fewings and Tim O'Shea, who were both named as substitutes. However, Tony Taggart had to play in what was more or less a wing-back position, while manager Graham Wesley also decided to experiment with using Chris Piper in an advanced midfield role behind the front two, which this time consisted of Scott Corbett and Lenny Piper, with Mark Harper now returning to his normal defensive role. Hampton and Richmond Borough, though, were missing 4 regulars themselves after suffering a few injuries in their 2-2 draw with Canvey Island in their last match, but they were clearly no mugs, as they were guaranteed of a finish in the top half of the table this time, when in previous seasons they'd been struggling to avoid relegation. Before the match kicked off though, it was time for League Chairman Alan Turvey to present the Ryman League Premier Division Championship Shield to Farnborough skipper Steve Watson, although it was so heavy that in an effort to avoid even more injuries, keeper Stuart Mackenzie had to make sure he was standing in a position to be able to catch it in case Watson dropped it on somebody's toes. In fact, because of their injury situation, Farnborough had so many players coming out for the presentation photo call hobbling about on crutches that it looked as if they'd just won a war rather than a Ryman League title. However, that was where the strength of their squad had paid dividends in being able to cope with that, and in teenage midfielder Tony Taggart they had a highly promising player who wasn't looking out of place, as indeed he showed after just 8 minutes with a brilliant instinctive half-volley chip which went narrowly over, with keeper Eric Talbot really struggling. However, Taggart then went one better just 4 minutes later when he made the most of some hesitation in the Hampton defence to toe-poke the ball through keeper Talbot's legs and into an empty net to give Farnborough an early lead. In fact, Talbot was looking like a bit of a clown again just a minute later when, after being forced to head the ball outside his own area, he then had to scurry back furiously to try and stop Lenny Piper lobbing him from 30 yards. And once again he was lucky to see the ball go narrowly over the bar in similar fashion to Tony Taggart's earlier effort. However, Hampton seemed to sort themselves out at the back after that, until the 34th minute that is, when midfielder Fiston Manuela produced an awful attempt at a defensive header from Lenny Piper's corner, but an unmarked Scott Corbett then badly mistimed his header as well, to waste a great chance of putting Farnborough 2-0 up. At least Corbett did hit the target just a minute later though, as he timed his run superbly to get on the end of Steve Watson's headed pass, but keeper Talbot made an excellent save this time from almost point-blank range. It now seemed that Corbett was getting used to his standing role up front for this match, and he did well again in the 38th minute with a good run and cross which picked out Lenny Piper perfectly, but unfortunately he produced more of a casual back pass than a shot. Hampton, meanwhile, didn't manage their first worthwhile shot at goal until the 41st minute, when Dean Green tried to surprise Stuart McKenzie with a fierce drive from an acute angle, but it was always a bit too over-ambitious trying to beat the big Farnborough keeper from there. However, Farnborough were only one goal in front, and they could have done with another goal just before half-time to really put themselves in the driving seat, so they were not surprisingly annoyed when referee Andy Wilkins, or rather his assistant on the near touchline, penalised Scott Corbett for being offside and interfering with play, when Lenny Piper's through ball went to an onside Tony Taggart instead, who of course would have been clean through on goal. From the linesman's angle though, it may have looked as if Piper was playing the ball to Corbett, and indeed he probably was, but no Hampton players appealed for offside and the play could quite easily have been waved on. In fact, Mr Wilkins actually seemed to be admitting that he might have made a mistake, but that didn't satisfy Jimmy Dack, who quite unnecessarily gave him a mouthful of abuse for almost a minute afterwards. Indeed, it wasn't as if this match had any importance attached to it, as the title had already been won, and the rest of Farnborough's players were treating the game as a chance to relax and enjoy their football. However, they might have overdone it a bit early in the second half as Hampton started getting on top for the first time in the match, with Dean Green testing keeper McKenzie in the 53rd minute with a shot which he may have seen quite late as it swerved round defender Barry Laker. Green, though, had shown a few glimpses of his talent in the first half, and he was now starting to be a bit of a handful, which was why Farnborough skipper Steve Watson deliberately took him out in the 56th minute to earn himself an obvious booking. However, some of Hampton's players, and especially their coaching staff in the dugout, wanted Watson sent off, as they felt that he'd deliberately trodden on Green as well, although the slow motion replay suggests either a great deal of play acting or a speck of mud in the eye. All that came from that though, apart from the booking, was a free kick to Hampton in quite a good position, and they ended up making the most of it after some clever and persistent play from the experienced Craig Maskell and Green himself, which ended with defender Matt Flitter somehow finding space in a crowded 6-yard box to head in on the goal line and make it 1-1. That woke Farnborough up a bit though, and they had their first chance of the second half 3 minutes later when Scott Corbett dispossessed Matt Flitter to set up Lenny Piper, but keeper Talbot did well to come quickly off his line and smother the chance. Of course, Farnborough midfielder Jimmy Dack had been fired up all match though, and he didn't need to wake up. In fact, he needed to calm down in the 63rd minute as he greeted a rather harsh booking for supposedly going in late on Fist and Manuela, with another mouthful of abuse at referee Wilkins, and he was rather riding his luck a bit. Maybe all that was making his teammates lose their concentration though, as Hampton nearly took the lead 3 minutes later when the impressive Dean Green was left with a free header from a corner, but Tony Taggart was alert enough to head it off the line. Although Hampton had been fielding an attacking-looking 4-3-3 formation all throughout this match, it was only now that it was starting to have any effect, and they had another good effort at goal in the 75th minute when midfielder Gary Holloway turned sharply in the area to get a shot in, but keeper Stuart McKenzie again looked very safe, as indeed he had for most of the season. As for Jimmy Dack though, he was as competitive as usual in midfield, but again perhaps a bit too much for referee Wilkins' liking when he went in late on Gary Holloway just seconds later, with a booking probably being deserved on this occasion. However, that of course meant a sending off as he'd already received one yellow card, but that was a harsh one and it looked suspiciously like Mr Wilkins had dismissed Dack more for chipping away at him all throughout the course of the match, with non-stop verbals as much as anything else, and he had now got fed up with it. Of course, that was totally needless in a game of such minor importance, but maybe Dack was just frustrated at being unable to play a part in the last few matches that saw Farnborough clinch promotion, and was trying to prove how strong a presence he was in midfield when he was fit. But that wasn't the only disappointment Farnborough had to suffer in this match, as substitute Tim O'Shea came on for a run out in the 79th minute, but then somehow ended up breaking his arm just a couple of minutes later, when he lost his balance and fell over trying to chase back to defend the through ball. That meant that almost half the Farnborough squad would now have to spend their summer break hobbling about on crutches with various limbs in plaster, or doing punishing rehabilitation routines with various physios in an effort to get fit for the following season. As so often happens when a player is stretchered off with a serious injury though, the game then peters out into a bit of a non-event, and with only 10 minutes left that was exactly what happened here, and so Farnborough's last game of the season ended up as a 1-1 draw and a bit of an anti-climax. However, there were plenty of celebrations to be had yet, as the supporters were then allowed onto the pitch to dance the conga, have a sing-song and eventually get showered with champagne from the players as they congregated in front of the main stand to see their heroes parade the championship shield in the front row of the seats for the benefit of a TV cameraman and various press photographers, but not us of course, as we were stuck up on the roof and couldn't see a thing. Anyway, at least we got some great footage of all the action during Farnborough's run into the title, and plenty of shots of the supporters enjoying themselves. All we needed now was an interview with manager Graham Westley, but that wouldn't be easy, as Farnborough's title win meant he was now even more in demand by the media, and it was far too hectic to talk to him at this match. However, we finally tracked him down at the club's training ground near Heathrow Airport at the end of June, which meant that the quietest place to conduct an interview there was in a locked changing room deep inside the bowels of the place, so that his mobile phone wouldn't go off. But although it sounded like an echo chamber in there, he certainly had some interesting things to say about Farnborough's season and what the future might hold. Before you took over at Farnborough, yourself and Graham Pearce had a brief spell at Enfield which didn't really work out. What are the main reasons why you've been so successful at Farnborough instead?
I think Enfield was a club in transition. Enfield was a club that needed a lot of change, and when you're changing things, people get affected by that. If you go back 12 months, 15 months at Farnborough, I was changing a lot of things then as well, and it's very difficult to get performance at a time when change is going on. People are confused, people aren't quite sure where you're going, people haven't got an objective in their mind, and it's a difficult thing to do, to manage through change and to get results at the same time. In fact, it's possibly an impossible thing to do, and I think Enfield was exactly that. I was brought in, I was given a remit, the chairman was very hands-on, he wanted to be involved, and I'm not the kind of guy who can have that. I like to be given the freedom to do what I want to do. I like the accountability and the responsibility to go hand in hand, and it didn't quite happen, but obviously last year at Farnborough was a very different kettle of fish and a very successful time.
When you first took over and changed the club colours and the name of the stadium amongst other things, you were presumably faced with some hostility from the supporters. How are they treating you now?
Well, I think supporters are funny animals. Supporters have always got another criticism to throw at you. That's part of their job in some respects, is to keep you on your toes. I took the colours back to what they originally were. I actually like red and white. The best clubs play in red and white, and I think there's something about it. I can't remember what they call it now, but it's got one of these funny names, isn't it? Feng Shui, is it, or something? How certain colours are associated with success. And rightly so. And I didn't like yellow personally. I didn't enjoy it as a colour. I didn't think it was a successful colour. It didn't work for me. So I made a decision that I thought was right. And the fans have to respect the fact that I'm going to want to do some things my own way. I think what they now think is that I will respect other people's opinions. I will take them into account. And I know that a club isn't about one man. It's about a club. And I think they know that now.
What's the thinking behind all these motivational phrases you use that you see in the programme every match? There comes a time, that sort of thing.
I didn't realise they were motivational phrases. If they do motivate people, then that's great news. But I talk as I see things, and I say what I feel needs to be said. And there was a time where things needed to change, so they got changed. Attitude is more important than ability. But these are just my views, and there's no specific thinking. If they do motivate people, that's great news, because that helps you win football matches.
Now, obviously, your nearest challengers, Canvey Island, they'll be claiming that they would have won the title had it not been for their backlog of fixtures. How do you answer that suggestion?
I always felt that we'd win the title last year. We did win the title, and Canvey had a very good season in their own right. I mean, we went there on the opening day of the season, and we knew it was an important blow to strike, the first day victory, the psychological blow. Whether that affected their thinking in terms of them concentrating on the FA Trophy or not, I don't know. But certainly we went into the season believing we would win the league. We did win the league, and I think that speaks for itself.
On the playing side, how are you going to approach next season back in the conference?
Well, we're going in there to win it. There's no other way of thinking in my mind. Whether as a player, as a football manager, as a business manager, I play to win, and there is no other option. It is the only option in my mind, and I'm going into the conference knowing that it's going to be a slightly tougher job. The teams in there are slightly better than the ones in the Ryman League. They need to be shown the right respect, but we certainly won't overestimate them, just like we didn't last year. Canvey showed that the better sides in the conference are there to be beaten. They wouldn't beat them, and we beat Canvey. Yeovil will remember me going there as manager of Kingstonian. I think they'd won 18 on the spin at the time in their championship season. We beat them. Dagenham will remember in their championship season last year that they came to Farnborough. We beat them. We know how to win football matches, and they'll be looking at us. We won't be looking at them.
It's been suggested that you'll be stepping down as team manager next season to concentrate more on your chairman's role. Is there any truth in that rumour?
I'm more likely to step down as chairman and concentrate on my managerial role. I love the football. I'm 33 years of age. I stopped playing because of a bad break to my leg, but I love the football involvement. My track record as a manager is mixed. I had a reasonably successful time at Kingstonian before they sacked me. I thought I got too involved on the club side of things. I can't think what they meant, can you, Lawrence? At Enfield, as you rightly pointed out just now, Tony kept very much a hands-on role, and things really didn't work between he and I. And here at Farnborough, we've got 2 trophies in 2 seasons, and it's working okay. We're going in the right direction, and I love the football side of things, and I'm enjoying what I'm doing. And as I say, I'll bring in a new chairman before I bring in a new manager.
Finally, what is the future for Farnborough Town off the pitch? Because we've heard all these rumours about, merging with Aldershot, and also the various ideas about a new stadium and everything. So what is going on exactly?
Well, I think when you're taking a club through a set of progressive moves like I am, you have to explore all options. You have to see whether there's anything in a relationship with Reading. We struck a strategic alliance last year. We played at the Medeski last year. What's he doing, they all said. We've talked about Aldershot and whether there's the opportunity for the 2 clubs to become stronger as one, Rushmore United, or to stay independent. I explore every option, and what's going on is that I'm exploring every option. I want the club to progress, I want it to go forward, and I'm looking at any way of gaining an advantage and making progress. That's what's going on.
And the ultimate ambition is to get in the Premiership in 9 years' time, is that right?
10 years to the Premier League was my opening gambit. There's 9 years left, we're one step closer. 4 promotions that we have to win to achieve that? So the club's well set, isn't it? I mean, 4 promotions in 9 years. I've got absolutely no intention of leaving us with any more than 3 by the end of this season. So it's a realistic ambition, a realistic target, and I can tell by the colour of the eyes of the players, just looking at them, that there's so much hunger in my team. There's so much hunger and enthusiasm. I mean, they've been back in since May the 29th, a lot of them. I can't keep them away. Most clubs won't even think about pre-season until the beginning of July. But these boys are hungry. They want to be fit, they want to be strong, they want to win, they want another championship. And I've got good vibes.